Hey guys, good morning or good afternoon. I am Ashley Irie and I am here to talk to you guys today about manual mode and how to run it on your camera. So a little bit of a backstory, because I'm a storyteller. I taught myself manual mode, but as a newer photographer, I spent a lot of time shooting in auto. So if that's what you're currently doing and you're trying to build your photography career, don't be embarrassed, don't feel bad. We all start somewhere and we all have our first day shooting in manual mode. So there was a time when I was like, why would I ever want to know and learn and take the time to learn this complicated manual mode? And let me tell you why. First off, so your camera is probably highly sophisticated, hopefully highly sophisticated, especially if you're able to adjust it from auto to manual. But with that said, when you're shooting in auto, your camera doesn't know what you're photographing. So for example, you're going to photograph your son's football game or you're going to photograph a ballerina. If you are using auto, your camera doesn't know a ballerina or a football player or a car or a dog or something that's in motion is right in front of you. So it just kind of takes its best guess, and your shutter speed, which is one part of manual mode, is not up to par with your moving product. So you'll get blurrier images. Sometimes you get lucky and that's not the case, but more than likely you're gonna need to be able to adjust your shutter speed appropriately for what you're photographing. So my whole goal for this tutorial is to break it up into sections, because manual mode is, for what it's worth, a beast of a lesson. It's a lot to take in. However, it is not hard. It is something that just requires practice, like any other skill that is worth having. With that said, I'm gonna make it as simple as possible because heck, that is the way I like to learn. Do not make things complicated for me. I like to make things easy when it comes to teaching. That's the way I learn. I'm also a visual learner, so I'm gonna be putting a lot of pictures in here. But I am telling you, if you do not go out and practice this, like I said, any other skill you wanna master, same thing, you have got to put forth the effort. When you do, I promise you it will become very, very simple very quickly. Another thing I do want to mention, I know there are so many different cameras out there. I'm not going to go over one particular camera, meaning you're going to need to know where these buttons are on your camera. You can find that on the manual mode, or just YouTube, where to adjust shutter speed on a Canon, a Sony, something like that. YouTube, where those buttons are. I'm just going to break down and simplify these things for you, but I could not cover, it just wouldn't be possible to cover the buttons right here on all these different cameras. So keep that in mind. Also, my way of teaching, remember, there's so many amazing photographers out there, or people who are just familiar with the camera. There may be more than one way to master these skills. No, there is more than one way to master these skills. This is my way of learning and my way of teaching, so I really hope it helps. So manual mode basically focuses around one thing when it comes to your camera, and that is the light or the lighting situation. You are figuring out these three parts because of the light you're dealing with around you. You are adjusting them based off of how sunny it is, how dark it is. If you want a special effect, which that's going to be special effects and silhouettes and things will be way later on. Just know the three parts to working the manual mode on your camera is completely based off of your lighting situation. Okay, so with learning manual mode, I'm going to break this up into I'm going to call them chapters. So I'm going to break it up in 5 different chapters. The first thing I want to talk to you about is your light meter. Your light meter is the little thing when you look through your camera or even on your screen in the back, you see a little scale. Right here in the middle means you're accurately exposed. If it starts going to the right, it means you're overexposed. And if it starts going to the left, it means you're underexposed. So left is too dark, you're taking a picture too dark. And on the right is it's too bright. You're not getting all your colors in there. The reason I'm mentioning your light meter is there are 3 parts to manual mode. You got a little triangle. All 3 of these parts together will adjust that light meter, and your goal is to get that light meter right in the middle. Or I can tell you, I like to shoot just a smidge to the left or just a smidge underexposed for my images, because I feel like it gives me a deeper saturation when I'm editing. However, you do want it pretty much centered, and then you can start adjusting that once you master manual mode. Your light meter is the one thing that is telling you that your 3 parts to manual mode is accurate. Okay, so the first of the 3 parts that I'm gonna cover, and this is in no particular order, by the way, it's just how I wrote out my notes, is ISO. Your ISO is something that most cameras, their ability will start at 100 and it'll go all the way up to 6,400. Now, the brighter your day, the lower you can have your ISO. So 100 would be on the brightest day, or if that light meter is going more to the right, you lower your ISO. So let's just say my ISO is normally the last thing of the 3, this triangle of 3 we're gonna talk about. My ISO is the last thing I adjust. I just basically adjust it depending on what I want my other settings to be. Here is truly what I want you to know about it. The lower the number, the better. So the closer to 100, the better. And the higher you get your ISO up there, closer to that 6,400 or even 3,200, some cameras will only go to that, and some cameras will even go higher than 6,400, but for this, we'll say 6,400. The closer you get to that 6,400, the grainier your images are gonna be. So why would you go to 6,400 or a higher number than that 100? You would simply go higher because your lighting is darker. So when I go higher than 100 ISO is if I'm shooting at sunset and it's getting a little dark, but we still have a couple more things we want to catch. Or if I've been at a wedding reception and I'm needing to capture some of the details around the wedding and I didn't have a light with me, I would up my ISO. A safe number for probably your average camera, so I'm gonna say not your cheapest and not your crazy expensive camera, would be 6 to 1200. After that, I personally, and this is all personally, but I personally notice grain in my images. The bigger they get, and you all know what I mean by grainy. Let's put a grainy picture in there. So the higher the ISO, I'll give you a couple examples here, giving your kind of run-of-the-mill camera. But the higher that ISO, the grainier your images. So when I go to a shoot, the first thing I do, depending on how bright it is outside, I set my ISO to 100, and then those other 2 parts of that triangle I keep talking about, if ISO's up here, I adjust these 2 things first depending on what I'm shooting, and then my ISO is the very last thing I adjust because I have to make it bigger than the 100 if it's dark outside. Okay, so now that we have talked about the ISO, the next thing I want to talk to you about is your shutter speed. So your shutter speed is basically how fast your camera clicks open and closed for taking those pictures. So for your regular standard shot, like you're just taking a picture of a family, I like to shoot, as long as the light will allow it, around 1/250, just in case a little kid throws their arms up and I happen to be wanting to capture the big hug or the laugh. I'm always ready to go. So that's why I keep my shutter speed. I'd say that's up a little faster than what technically it needs to be, but I'm prepared. Now again, all my shutter speeds are based off of what the light will allow, and with the thought that my ISO, I'm trying to keep it at 100. So we're gonna insert a little chart here, and this chart is basically gonna show you what your shutter speed would need to be appropriate for what you're photographing. So for example, a car racing by you, you're gonna have a much faster shutter speed, about 1/1600, just to capture that, maybe even higher. Ballerina, I would go 1/600. Now, if you're shooting at night and you're wanting to capture the sky, you're gonna get a much more long, drawn out shutter speed, which you're gonna, definitely put your camera on a tripod, and just because people are naturally a little shakier than we even realize. So your shutter speed can be longer and drawn out at night to let more light into that camera when it clicks open to take the image, versus during the day when it's bright and you're trying to capture something fast and you want that fast shutter speed. The faster that camera is blinking open and shut, the less light is able to let in. So again, you're watching that, you're adjusting your shutter speed to capture your person. So let's say I went to a photo shoot and I did 1/250. My ISO's at 100, and my light meter's right on the middle. So something that's good. But something that happens to me a lot, and this isn't technically a bad thing at all, is I'll go to a photo shoot and my ISO is as low as it can go, the 100. Great. Now my shutter speed, I'm fine with it being 1/250. However, the light is so bright outside that I'm overexposed and I've already got my shutter speed up. Just up your shutter speed even faster to where it brings that light meter down. That's great. You're just able to have a faster shutter speed. Not a big deal. The opposite isn't as wonderful. Sometimes it starts getting a little darker out and you need to capture your shutter speed 1/400 or something. That's when that ISO, you're gonna notice that light meter's going this way too much. And that ISO, you're gonna start adjusting up from that 100 to 200 to 300, wherever you need to bring that light meter back up. You may wonder, well, okay, at night I'm gonna be shooting and I don't have a big light for my camera, so how do I avoid graininess? Well, you don't. If you don't have appropriate lighting for outside, which is okay, you know, we're not all gonna start with these big lights, but just know, either time your shoot appropriately or you're gonna have to adjust your shutter speed and your ISO for what your lighting is, whether or not it's gonna be grainy. So avoid it if you can. I'm just saying, don't panic if you get stuck in that situation. Just still deliver it the best you can. I say this because I've been in that situation. So, and also, I do always tell my client when it's getting dark outside and I need my shutter speed up for something, or I just can't lower my shutter speed anymore because I'm gonna start getting a blurry image because my camera's not moving fast enough. I tell my client, hey, it's a little dark out. I'm happy to shoot for you if this is still what you're wanting and we haven't gotten all you wanted. Just be prepared for these later images to be a little more grainy because I'm having to change an adjustment on my setting to let in more light. Normally, they never question me. Now, if I don't tell them, oh, okay, it's getting dark, and I deliver a grainy image, I don't think I've ever done it where I haven't kept them informed of what's going on with the lighting situation when it comes to something like that. But if I didn't, I'm sure I would ask, like, why is my picture so grainy? Always be honest and like keep your client up to date with you. Okay, so the third part, so we got ISO, we got shutter speed. Our third part to our little triangle of manual mode is aperture. I love it. It's my favorite part because aperture depends on your lens's capabilities. So it's all in the lens, but aperture is how blurry you want your background. That's basically what that is. It's just a fancy word for how blurry can my background be. Now you've seen my pictures. Love a blurry background. I think it's beautiful. I think my subject pops when that happens. And also what I love is the blurrier my background, the more light my camera's letting in, which I'll explain to you, but the more light it's letting in, so I'm able to shoot with a higher shutter speed, which kind of my goal is to get that shutter speed up as much as I possibly can and keep that light meter happy right there in the middle or around in the middle. So this is how I'm gonna explain aperture. So think of it like an eyeball. And remember, this is all focused on how much light we're letting in our camera and where it's bringing that light meter. But imagine this eyeball. Let's say I'm focusing right now on the camera. My eye is completely open. The camera to me is in focus, but this all going on behind the camera, even to my brain, what I'm seeing is a little blurred out. But my eye is wide open and I'm letting in plenty of light. Now, if my eye is squinted, so imagine you're squinting to see something further in the background. When you squint your eye, you're letting in less light. Oh God, I bet it look ridiculous. You're letting in less light. But with that said, I see more clearly further out. So same thing with your lens. When you stomp down, which that's a term photographers use, but when you stomp down on that lens, you're seeing more of a background. So this would be a great way to shoot if you're shooting landscaping, like a house, and you want the barn in the background and you want it all to be very clear. You're gonna wanna stomp down on your camera lens aperture. I'll explain this terminology in just a moment. But with that said, so your lens lets in less light at that point in time. So again, you may end up when you're shooting at a higher aperture, you're letting in less light because your camera is squinting to get all the background. And with that said, you've got to adjust either that ISO or that shutter speed. And I feel like I have to adjust pretty drastically if I jump up a lot higher on my f-stop or my aperture. Those words basically mean the same thing, by the way. So when would I go up on my aperture? So a couple of reasons. If I'm shooting a family, I would be concerned if I had a really low aperture. If one person was more in front, the rest of the people would start to blur out a little bit. So I would want a higher aperture, probably like 4 to 7, depending on how big the group. Now, if I was photographing just a senior or just a plant, I would go down as far as I could. I'm gonna give you a ballpark here. I would go 1.8 on my f-stop or my aperture, all the way up to maybe 2.5, just depending on what all I wanted to capture, and still give me a really blurry background. So why people find aperture more confusing is the lower the number, the bigger the lens opens up. But the way that I look at it is the lower the number, the blurrier the background. I just tell myself that. Now, the higher the number, the more closed the lens, but also the crisper the background. It's really not complicated. I don't know why everyone says it's so complicated. Not everybody, but a lot of the videos I watched when I was doing my training, they were like, this part's so complicated. It's not. Just the lower the number on your aperture, the blurrier your background, or the higher the number, the more crisp your background. And lenses capabilities, they can kind of go all over the place. Most people will pay a pretty penny for a lens that can go lower in aperture. When I say lower, like 1.8, 1.2, people love that lens that can go down or stomp down that low on that f-stop or that aperture. Most kit lens that will automatically come with your camera when you go to the store and buy it will be able to go only be able to go to probably about 4. Again, these are just numbers off the top of my head from my own personal experience, but your lens will only be able to go to about 4 or maybe 3.5. So you're not going to get a super blurry background unless you're just shooting really close to your subject. But I've bought extra lenses and I'm able to stomp down or go lower on my aperture, which gives me that blurry background. I'm sorry I keep repeating it. I just want it to soak in. So I've kind of weaved in and out of all 3 parts to manual modes. So you've got your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. So here's your little thing, here's your little triangle. Imagine you're a light meter in the middle, that little thing that you're seeing on the back of your camera that's telling you if you're overexposed or underexposed. And you're adjusting all 3 of these things to slowly get that light meter right there in the middle, or quickly, however fast you can go. So you are responsible for figuring out how to adjust these 3 things on your camera. But I want to give you some settings to start with, and then tell you kind of the steps I would take if these settings you go out and it's too bright or it's too dark, what I would do. If you're going out and you're gonna shoot a senior or a family, what I would do is first get your ISO and set it to 100. And know that is the last thing you're gonna adjust, and you won't touch it unless you just have to, like it gets too dark outside or something like that. So your ISO, you're going to a shoot and you're setting it at 100. Next, figure out how blurry you want your background to be. If you love the blurry background, and yes, I do know I lean towards the blurry background, but let's say that's what you like too, I would go as low as your camera will, as your lens will allow, if it can only go to 4 or 3.5. If it can go lower than that, I would start at like 2.2 if you're photographing just one subject, and on your aperture. That way, if your subject moves a little too much, you're not stomped down on your aperture or your f-stop all the way, and you may get the eye, but then the mouth is blurry. So, because that's a very finicky area, so I would definitely start at 2.2. So you're wanting a blurry background, you're gonna set your kit lens at the lowest level or your prime lens at a 2.2, ISO at 100, your aperture set where you want, lower for the blurrier background. The last thing I would worry about is your shutter speed. I would worry about this last because it is something that if you're shooting and there's plenty of light out, which I assume that's where you're gonna start, and that's definitely what I would do, especially when you're first learning manual mode. But that shutter speed, you can adjust that all which ways and probably still have the same outcome. Now I say probably because if you get lower than, I'd say 125, then you're gonna start getting blurry images because it's gonna pick up your shake. But if you have a faster shutter speed, fantastic, just shoot all day long if you want to. So get your ISO where you want it, get your aperture where you want it, then come with your shutter speed ready to adjust higher than 1/125. And you will probably, if there's plenty of light, be able to get 1/600. You may shoot at 1/1200. Great, you're gonna have a really quick camera that your light meter's right there in the middle, you're well exposed, you're getting the blurry background you want, and your ISO's at 100, it's not gonna be grainy. Now, if it starts getting darker and your 1/125 shutter speed is not working, slowly start edging up your ISO. I would start there with that lower aperture, that higher ISO, in that middle of the road shutter speed, and then adjust your light meter as you need to with your shutter speed for just your first time to go out and try this. And then you will slowly start to figure out the little parts and pieces that you can, oh, I can adjust my aperture a little bit, and then I'll just have to up my ISO, or I'll just have to lower my shutter speed. It becomes very, very, this guy, that like a braid. It just becomes very, you don't even think about it. So just know when you first go to your shoot, you're looking at those three things, trying to keep your light meter right there in the middle. And of course, I'm gonna continue to tell you practice makes perfect, or practice makes creativity. So the more you practice it, the more you're gonna learn to do fun things with it, whether it's have cool light settings, or I mean, it's truly endless what you can do. I'm really praying that I made this so easy to understand. Know that it's not complicated, but it's a matter of practice. And that's where people fall short with manual mode. They don't want to put in the practice. They think, okay, I should know to push 3 buttons and then that just be it. But we are literally living in a world where the sun is going to control this camera. And if you understand when and why to adjust those 3 simple things, you are so golden. I'm so happy for you. With that said, please go out, please practice. I'm so excited to see you practice. I am gonna have a live Q&A so you can ask me questions. I do want to say, I will not be able to tell you where all the different buttons are on all different kinds of cameras. So ask me if you need to when we do the live Q&A, but there's a chance I won't be able to say, oh, on a Sony, it's XYZ, because I'm super familiar with my Canon and I'm not an expert on every single camera in line out there. However, I will do my best to answer, or I will get back to you. That may be the answer I give you. Let me get back to you on that. I won't leave you stranded though. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm so thankful for you. Have the best day, and I will be talking to you next month. I'm gonna tell you guys what I'm gonna talk to you about. Another live shoot, natural lighting, and lenses to get for your bag. Thank you guys. Have the best day. Bye.